I grew up in Bismarck. It's a really important community to me, and so to be able to serve in the state legislature has been just a really tremendous opportunity and experience. So.
Welcome to 701 Civics. Today we are visiting with Senator Sean Cleary from District 35 in the Bismarck area, and we are going to discuss a lot of different topics, primarily associated with the legislative process, what that looks like from getting a bill drafted to getting it through committee and final approval or not. So join us and learn more about the legislative process in North Dakota. And today we're joined with North Dakota State Senator Sean Cleary, gracious enough to sit down and visit with us and tell us about his role and views of the legislature and how that process works. So I was wondering if you could just start by giving us a little bit of a brief biography of yourself and your motivation to run for a seat, because you're one of the youngest members in the Senate for sure.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Brian, for having me on. And yeah, when I was elected 2 years ago, at 31 years old, was the youngest in the state Senate. And I've been involved in politics off and on throughout my career. Worked for Senator Hoeven just out of college, worked for Governor Burgum. A few years ago, that's what brought me back to North Dakota. And, I'm married, have a 2.5-year-old daughter, a son who just turned 9 months old, and a really big blessing to have a family. And that was really one of my big motivations for running. Is I loved growing up in Bismarck and want to make sure that North Dakota is a place where next generation has a chance to live in a community that I feel really blessed to be a part of. And so that was kind of the big motivation when I was looking at the importance about getting involved civically, that I could lend some of the talents I had to serve the state in the state legislature.
Sure. We are a citizen legislature, and everybody's really proud of that. So how do you balance those demands, then the legislative work, the personal life, and just all of it?
Yeah, that's definitely been one of the bigger challenges, both campaigning and serving. I work full-time. I was working for the Medora Foundation, now helping out with Julie Fedorchak's congressional campaign. Obviously, we have our legislative responsibilities that really gear up in the legislative session in January to April, and in the interim too. And then, like I just said, having a young family, making sure I'm being a good dad, good husband, that's my most important job. So that is a challenge, balancing it, but I've got a really supportive family, and just trying to make sure I focus on the right priorities, I think, is a big part of that.
So after getting elected and getting into the legislature, what's a typical day look like for you when you're in session?
During the legislative session, I usually try to get there pretty early, because the days are really full. Usually from about 9 a.m. to noon, you have committee meetings, and then from 1 o'clock on, you have floor session where you're voting on the bills that have been referred out of committee. So I try to get there early in the morning to make sure I have a good handle on everything that's going to be coming to the committee and on the floor that day. And then over the lunch hour, I usually try to use that time to prepare for the afternoon. It can be busier some days compared to others based on if you have to carry a bill, like explain it to your colleagues on the floor, or if you expect that there'd be a lot of discussion, making sure I'm doing the research there. And by getting in early, I guess that also helps me to get home at a reasonable time too, to be back with my family before bedtime.
Sure. How many committees do you serve on? Because there are a number of them, and the Senate obviously is the smaller body.
Yeah. Every legislator serves on 2 committees, an A committee the first 3 days of the week and a B committee the second half of the week. So I serve on Senate Human Services Committee and the state and local government committees, and really enjoyed that. Human Services gets a lot of the healthcare, social services bills, and then state and local government gets a lot of the bills related to the function of state government, and then our relation with cities, counties, other political subdivisions. Legislators who are on the Appropriations Committee, that's so time intensive that's what they do all 5 days of the week. So really enjoyed the committees I've been on so far, and hope to continue serving on those ones going forward.
Sure. And you mentioned the preparation involved with that on a daily basis. What does that look like?
The committee process is probably the most time-intensive part of serving in the legislature. When a bill gets in front of committee, every bill goes to a committee for review and for testimony. Folks will come in and give testimony in support of it. Sometimes there'll be folks who come in and testify in opposition if they don't like the bill or want it to be amended. And then some folks will give neutral testimony, usually if they're a state employee or just want to weigh in on some of the things, the technical aspects of the bill. They'll do that. And then legislators take all that information and they either amend a bill, or they can pass it out with a do pass recommendation or a do not pass recommendation. And after that, it goes to the floor for a full vote of the committee. But in North Dakota, every single bill that we introduce gets a committee hearing and gets a vote in the chamber, which I think is a cool part of our process.
Right. So how do you collaborate with those other legislators that's on the committee or otherwise, both within your party and the other party, even though we are mostly a one-party state, ultimately? Well,
we have a really, I think, collaborative atmosphere in the North Dakota Senate. My first term, I had a lot of folks in the chamber who were good mentors to me about how the process works, and then on the committee, how the different policy issues we've been dealt with, how those have been addressed in the past, to try to get some of these, some context for all these bills you're working on. And so I was lucky in that I had a few mentors in the Senate, Senator Judy Lee from West Fargo, Senator Jerry Klein from up in Fessenden. They were both great supporters and really helpful with just kind of learning the ropes and learning the work that we're doing day to day in the body.
Okay. Jumping a little bit more to the legislative process, particularly probably the needing of mentors and so forth. What is the process of drafting a piece of legislation from idea to getting it introduced?
Drafting the actual legislation, I like to joke, is kind of the easiest part of it. We have a really talented legislative council, attorneys and staff who can put together a bill. So it can be as simple as, I'm driving down the interstate and I have an idea pop in my mind, and I can call them and they'll get it drafted. And sometimes it'll take some back and forth to make sure you're doing exactly what you want to do. But, when you come up with an idea or someone brings an idea to you, you can go to legislative council and the staff there will get it drafted up. It's usually the work that comes after that that's more challenging. Make sure that there's consensus on the issue, that making sure you're working with the people who are going to be impacted by it. That stuff's a lot more challenging and rewarding part of the process.
How much research goes in on your part? I mean, obviously, if the legislative council is drafting the bill for coming up with an idea, like you said, you kind of just phone them and just...
Yeah, well, I would say, for the bills I drafted during my first legislative session, going back to that consensus part, it's working, one, to make sure you think the change you're going to do is actually a good idea. There's a lot of ideas out there. Not every idea is a good idea. But then, two, working with the folks who are going to be impacted directly by it and making sure that it's something that works for them. And there's always, regardless, it can be a very small bill, there's always different stakeholders on different sides of the issue. And so making sure that you're talking with people and trying to move the needle in the right direction, because you want to avoid a situation where you come up with this bill and not everyone's going to get along 100% of the time, but at least that you're doing your due diligence and making sure that you're getting all the perspectives of people that are going to be impacted by it.
So once that bill is finally drafted, what's the process of getting through the Senate?
So once a bill is drafted and introduced, for all the bills I introduced, I would go and I'd find co-sponsors for the bill. So basically colleagues who think the bill is a good idea and want to help support it by putting their name on it. So in the Senate, you can get up to 6 people. So I would go around and find 5 of my colleagues who I thought would be interested in supporting the idea. And then it gets referred to a committee that has jurisdiction over the bill. So, I worked on a lot of healthcare bills my first session. Those typically went to the Human Services Committee, where there's that hearing process that I described earlier. And when it gets passed, if it passes the Senate, for example, it goes over to the House, and they do the same thing. They have a committee process in the House. They can amend it there. And if it passes, again, the same version of the bill needs to pass in both chambers. So if a bill gets amended in one of the chambers and passes again, we'll have a conference committee where 3 people from each chamber get appointed to it, and they kind of hash out the differences and see if they can get to a version that both sides agree on. So it can be a 3-step process: the Senate, the House, conference committee, and then if it gets through all those steps, the governor either can sign or veto it. overwhelmingly the governor signs the bills into law, and then it becomes part of the North Dakota Century Code.
And what interaction do you have with the other chamber, with the House, on one bill, perhaps?
When a bill gets sent across the hall after it passes a chamber, the member who sponsored it takes it across and typically introduces it to the committee on the other side. So early on in the legislative session, I would say there's not a ton of interaction, but as bills start to go across the hall, that's when you have to start going over and talking with the committees and with the legislators on the other side of the building to make sure that they understand what the bill is doing, and that you can answer any questions they have, and work with them if there's any issues that need to be thought through. And like you mentioned earlier, we are a pretty there's Republican supermajorities in each state, but a lot of the bills we deal with aren't super partisan in nature. There are a lot of how government's working, what's working well, what's not working well, and so making sure you're talking with all your colleagues in either chamber to get a bill through the process is an important part of it.
They often get a dirty reputation, if you will, but what is the role of a lobbyist?
Yeah, lobbyists play an important function in the process. They typically represent associations or clients that are impacted by the state government, and so they'll offer testimony, suggestions for bills or amendments that impact their members or their clients. And they sometimes do get a bad rap, but I think they do play a role in educating lawmakers and what's going to impact their members, whether they're teachers or nurses. Almost everyone in any walk of life has something that the state government's going to impact, and so lobbyists, to me, represent their members when these bills make their way through the process.
Well, jumping down to constituent engagement. So obviously you're voted by a certain number, by your district. How do you stay informed about the needs, the concerns of those constituents?
Well, I feel lucky in that I represent District 35. It's the center slice of Bismarck. It's I can see the Capitol from my front door. A lot of folks who are engaged in state government, live really close by, and I would say primarily a lot of the outreach I get from constituents is either through email or they find my phone number online, and it is a lot more quiet when we're not in session, just because there's not bills making their way through the process. But when we are in legislative session, it's really become easier and easier to find your legislators' contact information and reach out. And we don't have staff here in North Dakota, so when you look my number up or my email up, that's my contact information. You reach out, and that's one of, I think, the really cool things about our process is it's really easy to get a hold of your local elected officials, and it's a part I enjoy about it.
And would that engagement be similar for, say, businesses and other nonprofits?
Yeah, typically, a lot of businesses or nonprofits might have people full-time, or at least who are able to go to the Capitol. A lot of people, citizens, are usually busy, with family or work during the day, so that makes the, email and communication more common. But everyone is welcome to come testify at legislative committees too. It's a very open process, so that's another way we hear directly from voters, from constituents.
Regarding legislative successes and failures, other than maybe just passing a bill or something like that, how does a legislator measure the success of your efforts?
Well, yeah, it's trying to make positive change on things that are important to you and important to your constituents. But I would say, I've had bills that passed, I've had bills that failed my first legislative session, but regardless of the outcome, it's, did I think what I was trying to do was the right thing for North Dakota, and was it the right thing for my constituents? And whether a bill passes or fails, those are things you need to start with. So it's, I guess, when I try to think of if I'm doing a good job, it's, am I representing my constituents well, and am I listening to my conscience? And if the answer is yes to both those things, I feel pretty good about how it's going.
Maybe on a national, but certainly a state level, how do you stay current with policy changes throughout the state that'll influence you in the next session?
I would say it's a combination of local media who are covering issues, and then state agencies. We hear a lot from them in the interim on what's impacting them. what changes they might need going forward. And then that's also a place where lobbyists and trade associations play a role. If there's ways that they're being impacted, they'll bring those changes and those issues to the legislature. So yeah, media, state government, hearing directly from constituents and different lobbying organizations is a way I try to stay up to speed on everything.
Final few questions. What advice would you give to someone who's interested in pursuing, maybe career is the wrong word, but a service in politics in North Dakota?
I would just encourage them to reach out to their local legislator or local elected official. We're really accessible. Like you said, we're a citizen legislature here. We elect a lot of people at the local level who, that's not their full-time deal either, serving in city or county government. And so reaching out and just asking to meet with them, or, when I was in college, I sat with Mike LaFleur from Dickinson, who's now the House Majority Leader. I knew his son and said, hey, can I come join you? And he said yes. And it was a really cool part of the process. It wasn't something I was even really planning on getting too involved in, but a lot of legislators are more than happy to chat with folks about the work they're doing and bring them into it. So that's what I would encourage people who are interested to do.
The session's coming up in not too far the near future. Even in a broader sense, what are some of the biggest opportunities and challenges for North Dakota in the short term?
I would say in the short term, we have this property tax measure that's going to be on the ballot this fall that would basically eliminate property taxes and have the state take over the local funding. And regardless of how that goes, I think there's a real desire to address what folks are paying in property taxes, because for a lot of folks it's a big part of their budget and a big part of their expense. So whether this measure is going to be the thing that drives that or not, I think the legislature is going to have to come back and take a look at how are we keeping property taxes affordable for families while at the same time funding priorities with police and with schools and parks and things that are important to communities. So that property tax question, I think, is really top of mind going into this fall.
And I was just kind of asking final thoughts. Like I said, this has been your first term that you've completed. You're coming in now for the second portion of the second session. What are your final thoughts on serving the people of North Dakota and the outlook for the future?
Well, I really feel fortunate for the opportunity to do it. It's a responsibility I take really seriously. We have about 17,000 people who live in the district. It's not a huge number compared to some other states, but I grew up in Bismarck. It's a really important community to me. And so to be able to serve in the state legislature has been just a really tremendous opportunity and experience. So,
all right. Well, great. Thank you very much again for taking time to visit.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And thanks again for listening to 701 Civics as we dive in and learn about the civics processes and people and positions in North Dakota. Please be sure also to stop and rate us on the podcast format that you're listening to so we can continue to increase our audience and be better citizens of our state and of our nation.